Welcome back to Start Helsinki's Startup Horror Stories. Today we are here with Ohto Pentikäinen, the CEO and one of the co-founders of Doublepoint. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Please tell me more about your background and about Doublepoint as a company.
So I'm originally a Ohto business student, and we started Doublepoint as a couple of bachelor students, and we started the company in 2020, so it's been 4 years now. And I took the role of CEO, originally raising funding and getting the first customer tractions for our company. And right now we are working on a gesture detection algorithm. So essentially we detect the micro gestures utilizing just regular sensors on smartwatches of, basically any smartwatch you can find in Gigantti. And gestures are usually used to control things like augmented reality, IoT, wearables, automotive, TV, all sorts of new kind of consumer electronics devices. So we're currently 15 people based in Punavuori. We're currently in our seed stage. And it's been a good journey so far, but eager to share some of the things on the background as well in our session today.
So, working with partners is essential, but can sometimes lead to unexpected turns. Can you share an example when a partnership went wrong or even turned into a nightmare?
So, the thing is that we work with quite big partners, and there's a lot of complex dynamics in a big company. And usually we know as much sometimes than the people we work with in a large company about things that are going on in that large company. So definitely on occasion we've had situations where we've been very surprised by some products being cancelled or changed significantly. And the people we work with, we talk with constantly, they didn't know. They just hear one day that, business is out, let's work on something else. And this is we were told to expect this, but definitely now that it's happened a couple of times when there's been some really interesting product prototypes or product kind of ideas or product concepts that just, get put on the shelf, it's always a bit surprising, and you do get spooked on whether that's going to be your fate until the end of time.
So it sort of makes you quite uneasy, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah, I think you need to be somewhat paranoid that this is going to happen, and you can't really base your business on kind of these unexpected kind of situations being really the backbone of your business, because you need to really treat them as options rather than, something that is a necessity for you. And we've at least we've had to grow resilient on working with these large companies. And usually the game with them is very long. So even though they may postpone a project now, it may come about later on.
Have you ever had to make decisions that compromised your original product version because of the pressure from a client or a partner?
So actually our product vision was very broad in the beginning. So it was actually more difficult to go outside the scope. We were trying to capture the movement of the hand, how the hand kind of acts in virtual realities and virtual spaces, and also some characteristics like how much force you apply and how long you touch something for. It was really broad. So actually, when we just told the partners that we are generally interested in a lot of explorations related, detecting anything to do with the hand, it was really difficult to go outside the scope. But definitely since then, when we've decided that we are building a algorithm that utilizes sensors already found on wristbands and smartwatches, definitely there has been a lot of temptation to go outside that. And at that point, you just really need to be able to say no and focus on what is relevant for you, while being paranoid enough that you need to also do explorations or concepting into areas where your business could grow. Because we don't think that we know it all, and we definitely don't know it all. So it's always good to leave room for that as well.
What have you learned about choosing the right partners for Doublepoint, given the niche you operate in?
I don't think this is necessarily related to our niche, but I'll start with something very general. A good way of checking their interest is whether they will pay you or not. And this may sound extremely intuitive, like, yeah, I mean, of course your partners need to pay you. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of big companies who are just used to using startups. Like they give your startup a interesting challenge. And then you get excited like, oh, big company X is interested in us. You get this like validation for your ego even. Mm-hmm. And you can put that logo on your logo wall on your deck. But if they don't pay you, they may not actually be interested. So we've learned that it's a very good idea to check the willingness to pay when we work with partners. Because otherwise you risk just spending a lot of time.
Everything as well.
Yeah, you risk spending a lot of time on things that actually don't create any business. We do sometimes work with partners who we don't get money from, but that's usually for a very good reason.
Now, investors are critical in a startup. However, meeting them can be terrifying at times. What was the most awkward or uncomfortable investor meeting you happened to be a part of?
Yeah, so there was one investor that we got to meet in the very early stage of Doublepoint who was, let's say, extremely straightforward in his comments. And I actually took it as a personal attack when he said that, when he said things that kind of challenged what we were doing. So he was concerned about, whether this is executable or not, whether this is something that's going to grow into a proper business or not. They were all very valid points that we needed to address at that point, but actually the way that was communicated to us did not seem like it was very caring. But then later on I realized that the investors, they're not in the business of caring unless they invest in you, then they care. But so that was quite uncomfortable, I'd have to say, for me personally, when some very core assumptions got questioned in a way where kind of where it felt like I was on the line.
Do you have any of your own spooky experience of pitching?
So actually, this is not necessarily related to a pitch, or actually it is. So I'll tell you the story. So again, early kind of stage naivety. I was not consulting too much with advisors in the beginning of the company's journey on all manners that I should have been kind of consulting on. So what happened was that one of the people that expressed interest in investing in our company did not confirm that he was going to invest. But at the very least, I hoped that they would have invested. And then I communicated to other people that they might be investing in a way where they got surprised because the information went in a circle. And they found out from some third person, like, oh, you're investing in this company. And I did not make it clear that they are not necessarily investing, but the information went around and there was word in the street that he was going to invest. And he got quite spooked by that. And he got actually quite angry.
Literally.
At us because of this, because you don't really want this information to go around necessarily. Now, most people don't care, and I thought that people don't care, but actually I've done a bit of angel investing myself now, and there's a lot of gossip around, like who was investing in who, and this type of gossip. So it was important, and I guess I became the gossiper. So so that was definitely one of the situations that I remember being a bit spooky.
As a touch interface company, have you encountered any major technical failures that set you back in ways you hadn't anticipated? And how did you recover from these setbacks?
I think what's happened with us is a certain calibration of what is a major technical failure, because what we were building is very explorative in the beginning. So we actually had to get used to technical failures, as you would call them, because it was almost expected. It was expected that most of this is not going to work. So it actually calibrates the word major to be something extremely catastrophic, like losing all your data, for example. Now that hasn't happened to us, thankfully. And so I wouldn't say that we have encountered something that would have, like in a major way, set us back significantly, because that's kind of in our DNA. We had to experiment and try different things on how to make it work. But definitely there's been a lot of setbacks. But I guess we've just had to build a process which accounts for that, and we learn for the next iteration.
And what were some of the most challenging moments in the early stage of developing Doublepoint?
Yeah, I'd say definitely lack of experience, definitely. So this is not my first startup, but it is my first tech startups. So we had, I used tech in other startups previously, but like this is really about building technology. And there's a lot of learning there. I feel like the lack of experience that we had basically resulted in us taking quite a bit of time to learn something that we could have learned somewhere else, or we could have had someone teach us. Now, one can argue that it's part of the natural process of building a company, but really looking back at it, we feel dumb, you know. So definitely, like this lack of experience was.
It's a learning curve.
It's a learning curve, really, and I guess you just need to be prepared for that if you're ever going to go on one of these journeys, which I highly recommend, because learning is actually quite nice.
Have you ever launched a prototype or demo that completely flopped? And how did that impact you and your team?
So we put out a bunch of internal prototypes that work to some extent. Like, let's say it teaches us something about how things work. And we basically learned that how we should evolve the next prototype to be even better in a certain area. But nowadays, actually, the product launches that we've had, some have been much better than others. I'd say it's around 50-50, success, failure. And failure is just against the expectations we had set. So we tried, a year ago in Slush, we tried launching a hardware product, which was not as interesting to the world as what we thought it was. But then we quickly pivoted to a software product that we launched 6 weeks later, which got immensely successful. It has over 75,000 users now. So so it was, and we got a lot of traction for it from partners as well. So definitely, sometimes you miss and sometimes you hit the target, and for us it's been maybe 50-50.
If you could go back in time and give your past self a warning about building a startup, what would it be?
To some extent, ignorance is bliss. And what I mean by that is that if I would have known what's ahead of me, I guess it's natural to consider whether it's actually worth it or not, because it is a lot of, sacrifices and it's a lot of trade-offs as well. Like it's if you do decide to build something, you need to be very clear on what the motivator is for you. So again, like if I had to go back, there's a lot that I can teach myself from when we started, but really I think ignorance is bliss in this case, that it's just good to go at it open-minded and see what happens.
People in the startup world often learn from the things that go wrong rather than from success. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from a mistake or a failure?
Yeah, I think the most high value things that I've learned are related to people hiring. Because I mean, this is said so many times it becomes a cliche almost, but it's really about the people, especially in the type of industry we are in. It's really difficult to manufacture a process that works with anyone. So we've learned to be very careful with why people want to join our company. And how do we test for that in interview situations. And in some cases, we also go in what we call a work trial. Actually, we don't call it a work trial. It's actually a freelancing contract for like a couple of weeks to a month before they actually start in the job. So they get a specified kind of task, and then they do it, and then we see whether we work together well. So testing for that has become important, and we are a very slow hirer. So we hire maybe a couple of people a year. So we do have the potential in doing that work, which we've yet to outgrow, at least.
What's the biggest, most personal sacrifice that you've made for the sake of Doublepoint so far?
So two things come to mind. One is salary. Yeah, so especially if there's business people listening to this, if you want high salary right now, you are unlikely to get it as a startup founder. So I've lived on a very modest salary, ever since we started this company, and it really grounds you to think about what is important. And where do you want your money to be spent? Whether it's on your salary, your well-being, or whether it's on the business. And we've decided to pay ourselves enough that we don't need to think about it all the time, but not enough to actually make a good living. So that, and definitely there have been several sleepless nights, so when you just look at the ceiling and think about the things that went wrong or the things that you should be doing better. So some extent, that as well, but the good thing with being an entrepreneur or startup founder is that you do have impact on the things that are wrong as well. At least in most cases, I'd say, because if you work for someone, and you have a bad manager, there's not much you can do about it. Yeah. But if you're the manager yourself, then there's absolutely everything you can do about things that are not going well. So you get this, even though there's sleepless nights, usually that just results in kind of improvement.
Yeah, like caring more about it. Yeah, no,
caring more, but also being able to do something about it. And that's kind of what happens to me. Like I end up thinking about what can I do better. And then usually by the next day, it's already better.
Yeah, because I suppose you're inextricably, sort of linked, tied to the actual fate of the. Yeah. What's one thing you would do differently if you could start Doublepoint all over again?
I think the number one thing is find people who've done the same journey or a very similar journey themselves, and have them on call. When I need them, or sometimes even weekly. It's just a weekly regular check-in session. I got that situation set up for me 2 years into the company, but definitely if we would have had it 2 years earlier, it would have been extremely helpful to have, especially as a junior founder. I would consider it being quite important to have this learning capability from someone who is there to guide you and whose job it is to teach you on some of the things that you don't need to learn by yourself.
To keep the Halloween spirit alive, if Doublepoint was a horror movie, what would it be called?
So, in the theme of scary movie, I would maybe say scary gestures, because when you have your hand against the light, like over here, then it can look scary, and if you do a scary gesture, it looks scary. I don't know.
You mean like shadow puppets?
Yeah, but like in a scary way.
I see. Okay. And what advice would you give to aspiring founders so that they can avoid their own startup horror stories? Maybe what investor not to go to?
Yeah, I'd have to build upon my previous answer of utilizing people who have done a similar journey as you before, because they can really tell you on what is the most painful thing. And definitely there are some themes that pop up every now and then. For example, leaving your fundraising too late. You know, if you have 2 months of runway or 3 months of runway and then you start fundraising, it's going to be extremely stressful. So there are some things that just work the way they do. And even though you would like to be the person who can fundraise in the last 2 weeks of your runway, I wouldn't recommend it for your personal health's sake. So definitely having someone there who's done a similar journey is also very helpful to not make the most amount of mistakes.
Okay, well, Ohto, thank you very much for coming and thank you for answering my questions. And we'll see you on the next episode of Startup Horror Stories.
Thanks for having me.